Excellent. So it's recording. So here is Machelle Johnson with us today, and I'm so honored to have her here. I have told you guys about her, but I'd like her to tell you guys a little bit about what she used to do and what she does now. And welcome, Machelle.
Thank you. And again, Pollyanna, thank you for having me. So, my background is pretty unique. And essentially, I, right out of college, started off my career working for the FBI. And I worked there for 11 and a half years in high level administration. So, in my time there, I had the opportunity to work in areas such as counterterrorism, counterintelligence, human intelligence, which is those are the sources that provide FBI agents information that they otherwise wouldn't have, and some other areas of administering programs throughout the entire FBI. Initially, I wanted to go the track of actually being an FBI agent, and I was initially accepted into doing that. Um, but what happened was sometimes people get stuck sort of in purgatory, I like to say, in trying to actually make it to that place. And while that was happening, my career was rising in the FBI while not being an agent. And so I just kept along that trajectory. And so after 11 and a half years, I did leave. And upon doing so, I wrote a memoir about my time there because one of the things that I noticed, especially as I rose up the ladder, is how poorly things are run sometimes from an administrative standpoint. There was a lot of unfairness that I saw, nepotism, potentially racism. And so I wanted to document these things because I think better should be expected from the premier law enforcement agency of the United States.
I want to just ask you to explain to them what nepotism is. I'm not sure if they would know.
So, nepotism is essentially favoritism. It can be for a number of reasons. A familial relationship. So, if I were to, let's say, give a job to my sister or brother because they're my sister or brother, not because they're necessarily qualified, or a friend of mine. So, essentially, favoritism that is rooted in a definite level of unfairness that is typically noticed by others in the organization.
So, one of the questions that I have asked every American guest speaker that I have had for my class is about the American dream. We here in Norway, we study the history of the United States, and there is such a thing as the American dream. So I've asked every guest speaker from the US, what does that mean to you, and how close do you think you ever came or are to achieve it, or do you have it?
I absolutely love that question. And I think it's so important because we are fed this notion of the American dream almost in the same way that as little girls, we're fed this notion that there's going to be a Prince Charming on a horse who's going to come and save us and we're going to live happily ever after. Reality is a little bit different. So the American dream typically is told to us in the sense of, you do good in school, you get good grades, which you absolutely should. Go to college, highly recommend that. And then, you get a good job, you work for 30 plus years, you get married, you have kids, you have the house and the white picket fence, and then you are happy. The reality is that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness for everyone. The American dream is something that is unique to every American. And I think that's the message that is lost. And so I can use myself as an example with my career in the FBI. So, I came in, as I said, just after college, 11 and a half years later, I'm sort of near the top of this ladder and I'm looking at it saying, wow, I climbed the wrong ladder. I want to do something different now. And no one tells you when they're feeding you this notion of the American dream that it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to do something else. It's okay to completely change your trajectory. And so when you have this picture in your head of what the American dream for you should look like based on what you've been told, and you want to go in another direction, there's a lot of internal turmoil that happens. And you have to come to terms with yourself on what the American dream means for you. For me, I've realized that professionally, it doesn't necessarily mean working in a particular job for 30 plus years with the exact same organization and then retiring and going to Hawaii when I'm 72. It means living along the way and aligning myself with the people and the organizations that best fit um, my well-being and what I am looking to do in my life. That doesn't have to look like one particular picture. So I think that's just very important, that the American dream is not one thing as it is told to us. It's what it means to each American.
Perfect. We have a lot of stereotypes about the United States that are perpetuated through the media, and nowadays with social media, the way that things rapidly explode, it is very important that I keep my students grounded into reality. So they have been studying on a book called Citizens, and this book is a textbook that combines language and also social studies, history, geography of English speaking countries. And one of the things that we're going to cover in the beginning of this year now, I believe it's February, is Black History Month. I'd like you to tell us your thoughts about that.
So I think Black History Month, as I have traditionally known it to be, and I say that having been a student in American schools my entire life. So it's literally a month where there is a focus on African American achievements, primarily in the United States, but somewhat globally as well. And while I think that is a great thing, I think it's very limiting because, and sometimes real history is not taught until you are learning on your own outside of an institutionalized system. So when you really delve into history and maybe read books from authors that are not on your school's reading list, you start to learn that a lot of the history that is not traditionally attributed to being Black history is Black history. Some of the folks that you are reading about are Black people. It's just not stated that way. Or they were influenced or worked directly with Black people on their teams and in their groups, but you don't hear that part of the story. So while I see Black History Month as a good thing, any focus on any disenfranchised group and honoring the accomplishments of those people is a good thing, but it's a month. Whereas Black history has always been in existence. So I think it's important to just look at things from a more open minded lens. It's not quite literally just black and white. Black history is all of human history. So I think it's important to keep that in mind when learning about Black history.
As a teenager, I went back to the United States. I was in the States as a child and then went to Brazil and then went back to America to finish high school. And I remember I was constantly asked, okay, so can you talk normally now, like a normal Black person? Are you even Black? And I remember feeling like an outcast, like discriminated on every side, and it was really difficult for me. So when they had Black History Month, people are making fun of me saying, "Hey, that ain't your history."
Right.
And what do you think about that as America, as the melting pot that it is? What do you think about that, what it is to be a Black person, how people in general in America view this? And is there, do you think, a tendency for people to perhaps, even in America, have stereotypes for how people should be?
Absolutely. So, America being the melting pot, we are a very special place. So, I'm not going to give credence to this person by mentioning their name, but there was a woman in America who it turned out was leading a local NAACP chapter, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. That's an organization in the US that works for the advancement of African Americans and really all people of color. She was leading one of these local chapters. I believe it was local. She was presenting herself as a Black woman, and as it turns out, she was not Black. She was a white woman. So I say that to start off what I'm going to say about this topic, because I think it's important to recognize that part of one's identity is how you are viewed in the world. Now, that doesn't mean that other people get to look at you and define you. But just because you are presenting yourself in a certain way doesn't mean that's what it is. I think we have to recognize that reality too. A white woman who is leading an NAACP chapter and saying she's a Black woman, that doesn't make her a Black woman. at the same time. And having my DNA done was a very interesting reality check. And I did this in tandem with some of my other family members. And, I think if more people really knew about how DNA actually works and how it really impacts what you might look like or might not, people may change their focus a little bit. Um, but going back to sort of the core of your question, I have been the student in school who was the Black kid. And, I've been pointed at and said, you're Black. Okay, great. Tell me something I don't know. I've also been in a situation in a primarily African American school where I was told, you're not Black. You talk white, which that's a whole different conversation. Okay. So I've been on either side of that spectrum where from the outside looking in, there's just, or the being perceived from the outside, there's just a lack of acceptance. So I think it's very important showing up as a Black woman in the world, whether you are in America or anywhere else, knowing who you are, because no one can define that for you. While you have to walk in your truth and not show up as something that you're not, like this young lady I was speaking about before, you have to define who you are. So I think there's just a level of fortitude and knowing what being Black means for you. And I think once people grow in that and gain their strength in who they are, they can better counter those you talk whites or, the other somewhat ignorant things that are said that are just completely untrue.
Yeah, we know who you're talking about. We watched a documentary about that with a classroom, and I reached out to her and asked
Me
her if
too.
what she had to say, and she had just like 45 seconds to say some things to say about the truth and how one feels, and but the thing that was really interesting for my students is that the way they saw this whole issue was, oh, she wants to braid her hair and do that. That's okay. She looks a little silly, but that's okay. But why would she say that she was Black? They didn't understand, but they also understood why people got offended, and they were really interested because we're learning also about white privilege, and they don't have an idea of what it's like to walk in the shoes of somebody that has to deal with that and not get opportunities because of that, and
Mhm.
watching others get opportunities. And affirmative action, for example, a lot of people have a lot of negative things to say about it, not understanding how it's deeply rooted in the ugly part of history in some countries, Brazil included. In the US, in Brazil, we abolished slavery in 1888. I believe in America it was 1863, if I'm not mistaken. So it was not that long ago, if
Right.
you stop and think about it.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
and now to the final thing that I wanted to ask you about. One of the chapters that we studied on citizens this year on that book was about the riot at the Capitol. So I would like you to talk about your thoughts about what happened. Is it related to Trump? Is it not? How do you feel about it?
So I think Trump was very smart about the way he connected himself to the riot, but did so in a way that kept him from having any legal liability. So it's, if you watch his rhetoric, leading public
I
rhetoric.
just need to explain to them what legal liability is. They're very good at English because they've been studying for 10 years, but there are certain words that I want them to learn.
Sure. So the best would probably be an example. So if I said, um, maybe you should just go rob a bank. That's suggestive. It's not telling you to go and rob a bank. It's just saying maybe you should. I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't. But if I said, go rob a bank, I'm telling you to do something that's illegal. So maybe I have some liability, some culpability, some responsibility for what you go do because I said you should do it. That is not what happened with Trump as it relates to the riots. His language was suggestive. It was more, maybe you should go rob a bank. as opposed to go rob a bank. And that's the difference. His language was very careful, it was very calculated. And I think the big thing with Trump, we can call him so many things. He's been called a racist, he's been called a misogynist, someone who doesn't respect women and all of these things. And I think all of it really boils down to the fact that whether you like him or not, there is a bit of an egomaniac there. And we see that play out in many ways. And so I think if any group is appealing to him and potentially getting him reelected, such as the group that attacked the Capitol riots, almost entirely Trump supporters, I think he's going to play to that. And so in his rhetoric, when he was speaking to these individuals at rallies, his language was not direct, so he didn't have any responsibility for what might happen. It was very suggestive, but he was also letting them know, hey, I'm on your side to some extent. This is what I personally believe. This is what many people and groups in this country believe. And so, regarding the riots themselves, I'm so taken aback by how flippant the supporters of that riot have been. Because, for one, when we see rioting and the vast majority of the people doing the rioting look markedly different, it's a very different headline. These people were tagged as patriots. They were referred to as, defending the Constitution. I look at that, especially having a law enforcement background, and don't see anything other than domestic terror. And so I don't see how it could have been chalked up to being anything but that. It's also interesting to me, and this is one thing that I'm particularly sensitive about regarding the riots, that there was an officer who, I believe it was the following day, died from injuries sustained at that riot. And the folks who have claimed Blue Lives Matter, that movement, which is aligned with that, far right segment of Trump supporters, didn't say anything about that. There was no condemnation that we publicly heard about what happened at the riots that led to this Capitol Police officer having died. We heard nothing. So for me, there is no part of their argument in trying to save the Constitution, make America great again, whatever that means. There's no part of that that's validated when you don't even care that as a result of this riot, a police officer died the next day from injuries sustained. So in my book, complete criminal activity suggested by the president, if not, with any direct legal liability, and they should be held accountable, legally accountable for what happened that day.
Thank you so much for that. I feel like this will help them see a different point of view. And I also, when I was watching that on TV and on the internet, I could not believe my eyes.
Right.
And I could not believe that that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living a time of chaotic despair. And sometimes it is really hard to not be able to do anything. But I feel like having a voice in education and educating our kids for the future, giving them all the knowledge so they can make smarter choices. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like oftentimes I'm referred to, oh, she's only the English teacher and the Spanish teacher. She teaches folks how to communicate, but it's a lot more than that, because with that voice, there's so much that you can do. So I'm very happy that we were able to do this. I want you to talk about your book, and with your permission, I'd like to maybe get like a passage from it so the kids can read and understand a little bit. And I want them to read. Reading is very important for them because English for them is a foreign language, and it will be really interesting for them. And if they're interested in purchasing your book, how do they go about it? Tell us a little bit about your book.
Sure. So the memoir that I wrote when I left the FBI is called Catharsis: Why I Left the FBI. And I named it that because catharsis is an emotional release. So it was sort of a, it's over. And then I felt the need to document sort of some of the things that I saw that I didn't like. But what's interesting about the piece that I wrote is that it's not merely a complaint manifesto. So it's not just a series of complaints about the FBI and I was done wrong here and I was done wrong there and the end. It documents my entire career and things that happened along the way that were simply not right, unfair, and other mismanagement that I saw. It does it with a little bit of humor, if people are able to pick up on that. But the important thing is at the very end, I actually do an assessment of what I think needs to be done to rectify all of those ills at the FBI to make it a better organization. I like to come from a place of if there's an issue, I'm going to try to come with a solution. And that's what I did in this book. And so the point of the book was definitely a catharsis for me, that sort of emotional release after 11 and a half years of my life, but also in hoping that someone somewhere in the FBI might read that book, maybe take heed to a few of the suggestions that I note, and hopefully implement some positive change. And just to highlight a few things that I talked about, nepotism, which we spoke about a little bit earlier. So some of that favoritism that's unfair. Just a general mismanagement in administration and HR and customer service that you would think would be, commonplace for employees at the FBI, but not necessarily. And then my experiences as a supervisor and sort of seeing the differences in how people are treated, sometimes potentially based on how they look. And so I sort of speak about all these things and bring it back home to, okay, here are the grand sort of macro level issues that I'm seeing. Here's what I think needs to be done to fix it. It is on Amazon, and I would be, completely comfortable with you sharing any portion that you would like to with your students, because again, I think it's important for organizations to recognize what's wrong, in order to sort of implement what makes that right into a sustainable future. I think far too few organizations actually do that, and so it's my hope that they will do so.
Yes, this has been wonderful, so rich with information. I'm just thinking with everything that they can learn from
Yeah,
this interview with you. And I'm so happy that we met. And I feel like it was such an unusual way to meet someone,
right.
that we were both in the same pageant. And lots of wonderful things came out of Miss Regal World, and one of them was getting to meet you and all the wonderful ladies that have also been present as guest speakers in my classrooms, and it's been
Absolutely.
wonderful. And thank you so much for this.
Thank you for
And
having me.
I'll give you feedback on how it went with the students.
Please do. I hope it goes over well. And if there are any further questions or anything, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Take care.